We want to go ahead and talk a little bit today about the legacy of Andrew Jackson. He's certainly one of the more influential presidents in our nation's history, and we've already talked a little bit about some of his more significant actions in the Trail of Tears and different things. But how does he leave a lasting impact on our country? Uh, there are several ways. One, the presidents who followed Jackson certainly emulated him. Presidents such as Martin Van Buren, who in fact was Jackson's vice president, elected 1836, and elected in large part because of Jackson's reputation. Um, but then following that, as almost a repercussion, almost as a reaction against Jackson and the powerful presidency, were presidents such as William Henry Harrison, who was a member of the Whig Party. He was the general at Tippecanoe at the beginning of the War of 1812. And he not only reacts against Jackson, but he also learns from Jackson. So, whereas Jackson was this powerful president, Harrison and the succession of presidents after him tend to be weaker in nature, as almost a reaction against the type of president Jackson was. But they also pick up on the idea that, hey, you have to represent yourself as somebody that the American people can relate to. In other words, the race for presidency becomes more of almost a popularity contest. Presidents try to present themselves as just a guy who can relate to the average everyday man. Campaign slogans like log cabins and liquor. Again, the common man. That's a direct reference to how Jackson was able to gain such a wide appeal amongst the American population. And so definitely a huge influence and a huge legacy of Andrew Jackson is the way the presidency was won, and for years to come, including all the way up till today. Other examples, people like John Tyler, who was a vice president who became president, took office 1 month after Harrison's election. In other words, he was vice president. He wasn't elected. Harrison died in office, um, and that was a disaster because Tyler all of a sudden doesn't cooperate with the Whig Party, which elected Harrison. And again, this is kind of where all of a sudden we start to realize, hey, maybe the president and vice president should be on the same party, and we start to switch things up a little bit. Uh, Also, a result of some of Jackson's legacy, an economic depression that takes place, the Panic of 1837, and it's really some of the causes the banks in the West, how Jackson had decentralized our banking, and a lot of the banks out west had really kind of gone their own way, and then of course Britain playing a role in that as well. These were all legacies of Jackson's pet banks, getting rid of the national bank. And the effects are that really Jackson's successor, Martin Van Buren's not reelected in 1840 because of some of the long-lasting repercussions of some of the economic policies founded and started by Jackson. Another one of Jackson's big legacies is how he shifts the power politically more to the people. Politics becomes less about rationale and more about emotion. And more people are voting than ever before because of Andrew Jackson. Uh, Politics almost becomes a national pastime as we sit around and we talk about it, and it becomes almost a form of entertainment. And that's really a result of Jackson. When you look at our founders, guys like Jefferson and Madison, these were towering intellects. After Jackson, you don't necessarily have to be a towering intellect to be president. You have to be somebody that can appeal to the common man, that can get people out to the polls and can vote for you. Also, presidents that follow Andrew Jackson, guys like James Monroe, have long-lasting impacts. The Monroe doctrine is still something that we use as part of our foreign policy in the United States today. James Monroe basically says that European powers should not interfere in the Western Hemisphere, and that any interference by Europe would be considered a threat to the United States. In return, he said we wouldn't interfere in European affairs. We wouldn't go to other places and put our nose where it didn't belong. And we wouldn't interfere with existing colonies. So basically what Monroe was doing was basically saying, hey, this is our side of the planet, stay off. And that's still a policy that we follow and adhere to today, directly quoted in incidences like the Cuban Missile Crisis, direct references back to the Monroe Doctrine. So again, a very long-lasting impact. And again, the idea that we're a nation, the idea that we're together, a result of Jackson. The Missouri Compromise, another thing that takes place in the years following Jackson, proposed really by Henry Clay, and basically what the Missouri Compromise was about slavery. The southern states were afraid that there would become more free states than slave states, then the free states would be able to vote slavery out of existence. And so there were a couple different states looking to come into the Union, Maine and Missouri, and in order to keep the balance, we decided to go ahead and admit Maine as a free state, and Missouri would be admitted as a slave state. Another part of the compromise had to do with 3630, 36 degrees and 30 minutes north. It was a line of latitude. Everything north of that line was supposed to be admitted as a free state, with the exception of Missouri. Missouri's north of that line. In fact, Missouri's southern border is that line. And that's why it's the Missouri Compromise. And everything south of 3630 was supposed to be admitted to the nation as a slave state. And in that way, we would try to kind of keep the balance between free and slave. And really what we're doing here with the Missouri Compromise is we're averting or trying to avert a civil war. Of course, that effort will prove to be fruitless, as we will end up fighting a civil war just a few years later after the Missouri Compromise. But it's really, you start to see slavery really becoming a dominant issue in American politics, and one that will eventually lead to the breakup of our country and the war to try to keep our country together.